born in 1838 in a town just a few miles from here, Hilltown, and his parents named him Sam Effring. In the 1870s, Sam moved from Hilltown and built a butcher shop on South Broad Street near the railroad tracks that cross South Broad Street, right near where now Stony Creek Park is at. His butcher shop would burn down a few years later by a devastating fire, and after he had rebuilt, he would begin to say, I can increase my business in my butcher shop if I start to create artificial ice. Back then in the 1870s, if you had a butcher shop, you needed to have ice, and he realized that he wasn't getting the best deal unless he started to create his own artificial ice. And so Sam purchased a 24 horsepower Corliss, named after George Corliss, steam engine that would start to generate electricity for himself and for his butcher's shop. You can actually go to the Lansdale Historic Society and you can see that Sam would end up hiring a few other folks to help him, and he would start to deliver ice to other business in Lansdale. It cost 50 cents to have 10 pounds of ice delivered to your home or your place of business back in the 1800s here. And Sam had that market here in Lansdale because he was the one who had this engine. Sam quickly realized, though, that 24 horsepower of electricity was way more electricity than he would need. Or that he needed to create ice. He had too much ice, so to speak. So Sam decided that after his butcher shop had burnt down the first time, that he would start to diversify his business as a good business person, and he offered residents of Lansdale bulbs for outside their homes. Back then in the late 1800s, Main Street on Lansdale was mostly dark. The few lamps were gas-powered lamps that somebody would go by each night, turn on the gas and light the lamp, and then somebody else at daybreak would go back through Main Street. And as you could imagine, back then, it necessarily wasn't safe, or you might not want to venture far from home back in the 1800s in Lansdale because it was just dark. There wasn't electricity yet. And so Sam would offer local owners on Main Street and in downtown Lansdale for $80 a year a 200-watt bulb and the pole, and would carry the electricity from his 24-watt generator, basically, and would give them the gift of light at night. And residents would then gather together and say, okay, we can share this cost together. And so for little as 2 cents per night, they could light up their tiny little block and share this light together at night. Later on, Sam could not keep up with the demand. And so in the early 1900s, Lansdale built its first electric power company and would generate its own electricity for many years back behind South Richardson Street. Now the Madison Street apartments are there, and the building is no longer there. And that was then eventually his business, Sam's business, of providing these 200-watt light bulbs and the poles and light would be taken over by what would shortly become Lansdale Electric. That while as a borough we no longer generate our own electricity, we do buy wholesale from PECO and from a couple other businesses. Not all of our electricity comes from Pico. And to this day, in 2026, we have our own electric company. You will often see a Lansdale Electric out cutting the trees around the power lines and maintaining the electricity. And Lansdale, Trinity, as part of the Lansdale Borough, continues to support Lansdale Electric each month and has this reminder of Sam Effring, who first brought a light bulb to the Lansdale Borough all those years ago. We're in the midst of our sermon series during the Sundays after Epiphany that we are speaking about God's doing. We started a few weeks ago by talking about how God's doing is both a noun and a verb. Last week we talked about God's doing is renewal. And this week we are talking about illumination, being illuminated. God's doing is illumination. And as we mostly focus on together our Old Testament lessons from Isaiah during this season after Epiphany, it was interesting to learn this history. A few years ago at Lansdale's 150th anniversary, I was invited to give the invocation for it, and I ended up sitting next to what we call the director of our sewer system and of our electric company, to start to hear some of these stories about the early days of Lansdale as we looked back and they shared a little bit about the history. Because I don't think Sam ever envisioned back then, as industrious as he was and innovative as he was, what Lansdale Electric would turn out to be today. And that really nowadays, you can just go to a wall and hit a light and all the lights come on. I mean, it is all automated here in our sanctuary. Generally, Linda or Andrea, who are our first staff members, most Sundays here in the sanctuary, just hit a light and all of the lights on the sanctuary come on. And we have this complicated dimmer switch system here at Trinity where we can dim the lights and only have some on and off. And we don't think really much about it, except we know that it just happens when you hit the switch or push the button. In fact, I don't think much about it until I go to turn the light switch on and nothing happens, right? Or when it is a dark and stormy night and all of a sudden your house goes dark and you're left scratching your head as you very tenderly try to remember where you left everything out as you go to look for the flashlight, right? My parents, when we moved into my grandmother's house after she died, I remember one of the first times the power went out, and my dad went down to the fuse box, which was still original to the home, and held up what looked like these tiny little baby food jars that were these glass fuses, and held up each one to the flashlight to the bright light to figure out which one was out so that we could replace it, and they were different colored depending upon what they were being used for. And most of us, I imagine, just take advantage for having things like electricity today or clean water when we go to the faucet. It was Bill Grave who taught me when I first came to Lansdale, and we were talking about joining the Wissahickon Faith Community Association. Shared with me that the Wissahickon Creek actually begins in Lansdale. It begins over in the Lowe's parking lot. There's actually a storm drainage that says where it is, because I don't want anything dumped in there, and then the Wissahickon Creek gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it travels and it receives more water from the ground, and that it travels through Lansdale. I hadn't known a bit about that. I just kind of took advantage that, well, we're close enough to the Wissahickon area that we can join the Wissahickon Faith Community without knowing that it begins very close to here. About 7 centuries before Jesus would be born, Isaiah had entered into Israel and Judah, which was now 2 different kingdoms, came to walk with, to challenge, and to offer a word of hope to God's chosen people. They had been in slavery, they had been in bondage many times throughout their history, from when they were taken into slavery in Egypt and wandered in the desert for 40 years. They had seen their temples rise and then fall again. They had seen their kingdom be torn in two. They'd seen the 12 tribes be scattered. In fact, really, Isaiah is kind of broken into 3 different books. We see it as one book in our Old Testament, but it's 3 different books. And the first 39 chapters or so are really about the destruction and the judgment and the word of caution that Isaiah brings to his people. And then beginning in chapter 40, Isaiah begins to offer a word of hope and of restoration. And where we get our lesson today, these first 6 or 7 verses from Isaiah chapter 42, we really see Isaiah's tone start to change as he talks and illuminates the one who is called the servant, who is going to set God's people free. Now, when Isaiah spoke these words, the Jewish people did not yet have and know the name Jesus. But they knew that God was going to send a servant who would rescue God's people, even if they didn't know the name and all of the details yet. And so Isaiah chapter 42 is the first of a couple of servant chapters. We're familiar with another servant chapter really well, Isaiah chapter 53, which we hear either on Ash Wednesday or Good Friday. Either when we come forward, we call it the suffering servant, is often the header in our Bibles. The one who will suffer on behalf of humanity. And we either read it or sing it when we receive the ashes on our foreheads and we are reminded that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. Or our worship team uses it on Good Friday when we remember the violent death that Jesus experienced on our behalf and to save us from death, destruction, and evil. But in Isaiah chapter 42 is the first of those chapters, the servant. And this is the servant who is going to rescue, the servant who is going to be God's representative, that is going to deliver a message of hope and reconciliation and is going to illuminate the world with God's love. You can read in these first verses that Riley read for us, you read about how this will be the one who the reed will not be broken and whose wick will not be snuffed out. And it is a word of hope to the people that despite the destruction and the evil that is surrounding them, that the one who is coming, the servant is coming, who will change the course of history forever. And it is through that one where the oppressed will be released, where the blind will see, the lame will walk and be healed, the deaf will hear again. And that through this servant, they will know of God's generosity and love, and know what hope looks like. This chapter is the chapter that's appointed for the baptism of our Lord. We heard Matthew's version of this where Jesus comes down to the Jordan River. Jesus committed no sin, and yet Jesus gets in line with everyone else that John is baptizing that day, waits patiently. The person in front of Jesus is baptized. John then sees that it's Jesus and says, wait a second, you should be baptizing me. And Jesus says no and persuades him, and John says, fine, I will baptize you, and baptizes him. And then the skies break open and this voice from heaven declares that this is my beloved, the one whom I am well pleased. And we have this beautiful moment that at that Jordan River where Jesus is baptized, we are given a glimpse of the future of what this servant will do on our behalf. And we continue to celebrate that now 2,000 years later. Each time we gather together at one of our 3 fonts and we celebrate either a child or an adult's baptism, when we bring them to the font with this reminder that God illuminates our lives through the birth, the life, through the baptism, through the death, and through the resurrection of his Son. And that as we are powered up, as we receive that power that comes from God, our light is switched on. Our 200-watt light bulbs, which you don't want to put in a normal household fixture. Our light is switched on and can never be switched off. Because unlike electricity, which is a finite resource, the one who illuminates, the one who names us children and adopts us, can never be switched off. And that is an incredible message of power and hope in our world. That the one who serves on our behalf, the one who makes us new, is the source of all things. And as we heard last week, is a light to the nations. And in the New Testament, a light that darkness shall not overcome. And that in our baptisms, each time that we make the sign of the cross on our foreheads, or we are splashed with water, we give thanks. We give thanks for that one who Isaiah prophesied 7 centuries before his birth. The one who illuminates the world, who lights us on fire with the good news, who rescues us from sin and evil and Satan and the destruction that seeks to diminish us, that seeks to snuff out our light. That it is impossible for those who are children of God. And so this day, dear church, may you remember that your light, the light lit at your baptisms, maybe a few months ago or several decades ago, is a light that will never be snuffed out. A light that when your parents and your sponsors brought to you, much like Sam when he decided to start selling the light in Lansdale all those years ago, can have unlimited potential and can literally change and light up the world that is around us. And that where there is light, where God's light shines, there can be no darkness. Amen.